പാർട്ടിസിപ്പേഷൻ നോക്കണം. ആ ഓക്കെ.
ഞാനാണ് മറ്റേ
ഇനി ഷബീഷ പോസ്റ്റ് ആക്കണം. ഷബീഷാനെ സെലക്ട് ചെയ്യും. എത്ര മൗസ് ആൾക്കാർ കയറി വരുന്നുണ്ട്. എനിക്ക് നീ ഒന്ന് ചോദിച്ചേ സാറിന് വീഡിയോ സാറിന് കിട്ടും.
ഹലോ ജിജോ സാറേ,
കേക്കാവോ?
ആ കേൾക്കാം കേൾക്കാം കേൾക്കാം. എന്നെ പോസ്റ്റ് ആക്കി അല്ലേ?
ആ കേൾക്കണ്ട. ഇനി അനുമേടത്തെ ആക്കിയാൽ മതി. അത് സാറൊന്ന് ചെയ്ത് നോക്കിയേ പറ്റുന്നുണ്ടോന്ന്
നോക്കട്ടെ. ആസ്ക് ടു അൺമ്യൂട്ട്. ഇല്ല, പറ്റുന്നില്ല.
സാറിന് ഞാൻ ഹോസ്റ്റ് ആക്കണോ?
അപ്പൊ അവിടെ റെക്കോർഡിംഗ് നടക്കുമല്ലോ, കുഴപ്പമുണ്ടാവില്ലല്ലോ?
ഇല്ല, റെക്കോർഡിങ് സാറിന്റെ രീതിയിൽ നടക്കുന്നതാണ്. ഞാനിപ്പോ നോക്കാം.
ആ ആ ആ
ഇപ്പൊ നോക്കിയേ.
മീ ഹോസ്റ്റ് കോ ഹോസ്റ്റ് ആക്കിയിട്ടുണ്ട്. ഇൻഫോ ലിസിനെ ഞാൻ ഹോസ്റ്റ് ആക്കിയിട്ടുണ്ട്.
ഓക്കെ. ഇപ്പൊ റെക്കോർഡിംഗ് ഇവിടെ തന്നെയാ.
അതെ അല്ലേ? ഞാൻ വേറൊരു ഫാക്കൽറ്റിനെയും കൂടി കോ ഹോസ്റ്റ് ആക്കാം. അഥവാ എന്തെങ്കിലും പ്രോബ്ലം വന്നിരുന്നെങ്കിലും വേറെ ആരെയും കൂടി ആക്കിയേക്കാം.
ഹലോ
ഹലോ,
കേൾക്കാമല്ലോ അല്ലേ?
കേൾക്കാം മേഡം. ആ സ്ക്രീന് വേണമെങ്കിൽ സ്ലൈഡ് ഷോ ഒന്ന് വലുതാക്കിക്കോളൂ മേഡം.
സ്ലൈഡ് ഷോ ആക്കിക്കോ.
Good morning, ma'am.
Morning. Morning.
Good morning, ma'am.
Good morning, Anubis.
Good morning. Who is that? Jyotisha?
Rajita.
Okay.
Good morning, ma'am. It's Nail.
Oh, good morning, Nile.
ഹലോ, എല്ലാവർക്കും കേൾക്കാൻ പറ്റുന്നില്ലേ? ഓഡിബിൾ ആണല്ലോ അല്ലേ?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
ഓക്കെ. അനു മാഡം ഒന്ന് സംസാരിക്കാവോ? എല്ലാവർക്കും ഒന്നും ക്ലിയർ ഉണ്ടോ നോക്കാം. നമുക്ക് തുടങ്ങാം. ഏകദേശം
Good morning, all.
Good morning, ma'am.
ഓക്കെ അല്ലേ അല്ലേ? നോ ഇഷ്യൂ ഐ തിങ്ക്. എല്ലാവരും ഒന്ന് മ്യൂട്ട് ചെയ്യണം. നിങ്ങളെ മ്യൂട്ട്, ആ സ്പീക്കർ ഒന്ന് മ്യൂട്ട് ചെയ്യുക. അതങ്ങനെ മ്യൂട്ട് ചെയ്തിട്ടത് കൊണ്ട് നിങ്ങൾക്ക് ആർക്കും കേൾക്കാതെ വരില്ല. അത് ഓണാക്കിയിടണം എന്നില്ല. നിങ്ങൾ ക്ലാസ് കേൾക്കുന്നതിന് വേണ്ടിയിട്ട് അവർക്ക് അറിയുന്നവരായിരിക്കാം, അറിയാത്തവർക്ക് വേണ്ടിയിട്ടാണ് ഇത് പറയുന്നത്. ഓക്കെ, നിങ്ങൾക്ക് അവസാനം ക്വസ്റ്റ്യൻ ചോദിക്കാനുള്ള സമയം ഉണ്ടാകും, അവസരം ഉണ്ടാകും. അപ്പോൾ നിങ്ങൾക്ക് അത് അൺമ്യൂട്ട് ചെയ്യുകയും അപ്പോൾ തന്നെ ക്വസ്റ്റ്യൻ ചോദിക്കുകയും ചെയ്യാവുന്നതാണ്. അതേപോലെ ക്ലാസിന്റെ ഇടയ്ക്ക് സ്ക്രീന് ഷെയർ ഓപ്ഷൻ എന്തായാലും ഡിസേബിൾ ചെയ്യും. എന്നിരുന്നാലും നിങ്ങൾക്ക് ഏബിൾ ആയി കിട്ടുകയാണെങ്കിൽ തന്നെയും അതിൽ ഡ്രോയിങ്, വരകൾ അങ്ങനത്തെ കാര്യങ്ങളും ചെയ്യാതിരിക്കാൻ ശ്രമിക്കണം. അത് സ്ക്രീനിലെ മറ്റ് ശ്രദ്ധിക്കുന്ന ആൾക്കാർക്ക് ഡിസ്റ്റർബൻസ് ആയിട്ട് മാറുന്നുണ്ട്.
Good morning, Deepa, ma'am.
Good morning, ma'am. Good morning.
Morning.
Good morning.
അവിടെ തന്നെ മഴയൊന്നുമില്ലല്ലോ മാഡം? നെറ്റ്വർക്ക് പ്രോബ്ലം പ്രശ്നമൊന്നുമില്ലല്ലോ?
ഒന്നുമില്ല. Everything is fine.
Joseph. Hello, madam. Hello, can you hear me? Everybody? Hello, Anu madam, കേൾക്കുന്നുണ്ടോ?
കേൾക്കാം സർ.
എന്നെ ഒന്ന് co-host ആക്കാവോ?
അതിനുള്ള ഓപ്ഷൻ ഇപ്പൊ കാണുന്നില്ല. മോറിൽ ചാറ്റ്.
ആയിട്ടുണ്ട്.
ഓക്കെ.
ഓക്കെ, താങ്ക് യു. അപ്പൊ നമുക്ക് സ്റ്റാർട്ട് ചെയ്യാം.
ഓക്കെ സർ.
So, very good morning to all. Greeting from Lissi College of Allied Health Sciences. Welcome to the 7th day of our academic webinar series, Excellentia. Today we have the dedicated and enthusiastic academician, Mrs. Anu Catherine Jacob from Department of Pathology, Amrita Institute of Medical Sciences, Cochin, with the topic Laboratory Evaluation of Hemostasis. Madam, hearty welcome you.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah. Then my dear colleagues, students of Lissi College of Allied Health Sciences, principals, teachers, students, and professionals from various colleges and industries. On behalf of Lissi College of Allied Health Sciences, I heartily welcome you all. Now I request Mrs. Anupriya George, Assistant Professor, Lissi College of Allied Health Sciences, to introduce today's speaker. Anupriya, madam, please.
Thank you, sir. Good morning, everyone. I am Anupriya Jose, Assistant Professor, Lissi College of Allied Health Science, Ernakulam. It is indeed a great pleasure and honor to introduce our chief guest, Mrs. Anu Catherine Jacob, to today's webinar series. She will be discussing about a topic, laboratory evaluation of hemostasis. Mrs. Anu Catherine currently working as lecturer in the Department of Pathology at Amrita Institute of Medical Science, Kochi. She had completed her graduation in BSc MLT from School of Medical Education and post-graduation in MSc MLT Pathology from Amrita Institute of Medical Science. She has 15 years of teaching experience, 8 years with School of Medical Education, TD Road, Ernakulam. And for past 7 years, she is working in Amrita Institute of Medical Science. Her areas of interest include the diagnosis of rare bleeding and coagulation disorders. She also has clinical experiences in advanced coagulation testing, lab catering for the diagnosis of bleeding and coagulation disorders in Amrita Institute of Medical Science. Currently, she is pursuing her PhD in utility of platelet microparticle as a diagnostic and prognostic tool in lung cancer patients. She had presented several papers and also presented a poster in the virtual summit of World Federation of Hemophilia. She had also published papers in different journals. Respected ma'am, thank you so much for being with us today. Without further delay, on behalf of the entire Lissi family, I express a warm welcome to Mrs. Anu Catherine Madam to this online webinar series. Welcome, ma'am.
Thank you, Anupriya.
Madam, floor is yours. You can start with the academic session. Thank you.
Okay, sir. Let me take this opportunity to thank the management of Lissi Medical and Education Institutions, and especially the principal, Dr. Shabir Iqbal, for providing me the chance to present this topic. And as all of you know, this is a bit tough topic. And so I need your kind attention and cooperation throughout the entire presentation. I would like to thank the management for arranging such or for utilizing the online platform for sharing of knowledge during this lockdown days. Thank you, Shabir sir. Once again, I request you to your kind attention during the entire talk. Thank you, dear all. Let me start. So, shall I start, sir?
Yeah, yes, madam. Yes, madam. You can start.
Okay. So my topic is laboratory evaluation of hemostasis. So I will discuss these topics under these headings. Then what is hemostasis? Basically, before going to the testing, we should have a basic idea about what is normally happening inside a blood vessel. So actually hemostasis is all about balance. It's a balance between the coagulation system and the anticoagulation system. And if the coagulation system is unbalanced, that will lead to the bleeding. And if the anticoagulation system is unbalanced, that will lead to thrombosis. So it's actually a matter of balance between the coagulation system and anticoagulation system. So let me discuss what is happening in a resting endothelial cell. Here you can see the resting endothelial cell. The resting endothelial cell, the platelets are normally inhibited. They will flow through the circulation. The main agents that inhibit the platelet activation are prostacyclin, nitric oxide, and ADPase. And the inhibitors of coagulation cascade are glycosaminoglycan or heparin sulfate, which activates antithrombin, and that antithrombin in turn inhibits factor 10A and factor 9. And the second one, which is expressed on the surface of the endothelial cell, is the thrombomodulin. This thrombomodulin modulates thrombin and thereby inactivating the coagulation cascade. Then EPCR, that is endothelin protein C receptor, which is a receptor for protein C, and this protein C on getting activated will activate protein S, and the main function of the protein S is to inactivate activated factor 5 and factor 8. And then coming to the, normally small clots may be formed in the blood vessel. So that clot has to be lysed in a normal situation. So that clot will be lysed by the activation of fibrinolytic system, that is tissue plasminogen activator and urokinase plasminogen activator. So that is a mechanism that normally maintains the blood in a fluid state inside the blood vessels. Then we'll see what will happen when the endothelial cell is damaged. The exact ulta of the thing that is happening in the resting endothelial cells happens when it is activated. Here you can see a damage to the endothelial cell. Here the collagen is exposed, which is a potent stimulant for the platelet adhesion. Then platelet activating factor is released. Then thromboxane A2
Hello, madam. Hello, madam. Hello, Anu madam, can you hear me? വേറെ ആൾക്കാർക്ക് കേൾക്കാത്ത ഇഷ്യൂസ് ഉണ്ടോ?
ഇല്ല, ഷബീർ സാറെ കേൾക്കാൻ
പറ്റുന്നുണ്ടോ അല്ലേ?
കേൾക്കുന്നുണ്ട്.
എനിക്ക് കേൾക്കാൻ പറ്റുന്നില്ല, അതുകൊണ്ടാണ് സോറി. ബാക്കിയുള്ളവർക്ക് ഇഷ്യൂ ഇല്ലെങ്കിൽ ഓക്കെ, കാര്യം വേണം.
Okay. So inhibition of the collagen activator inhibitor, how the balance is maintained. Hello, sir.
Hello, madam.
Stuck.
കേൾക്കുന്നില്ലേ?
കേൾക്കുന്നുണ്ട്, പക്ഷേ സ്ലൈഡ് ചേഞ്ച് ചെയ്യാൻ പറ്റും. ഓക്കെ ഓക്കെ ശരി. It's okay, sir. Then coming to the hemostasis, actually it's the property of the blood vessel in the to maintain the blood as a fluid within the blood vessels and the system's ability to prevent excessive blood loss on injury. And it occurs in 3 stages. That is primary, which is facilitated by the platelets and the blood vessel, and the secondary, which is initiated by the coagulation factors, and finally the fibrinolysis. So let's see what's the role played by the vessel wall. Here you can see the vessel wall is injured, and the initial response is the vasoconstriction. So what
Excuse
happens?
me, ma'am.
Yes. Yes.
We can see the slide, ma'am.
Okay.
Slides കാണുന്നില്ല.
Share വന്നില്ലേ? Audible അല്ലെന്ന് പറയുന്നു. Screen share. Now is it visible?
Yes, madam. Yes,
Hope it is visible now.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So the vasoconstriction is initiated by the endothelin 1. This damaged endothelium will release endothelin 1, and it is a potential vasoconstrictor that causes the vasoconstriction. So 2 things will happen during the vasoconstriction. It will minimize the blood flow so that the blood loss is minimized, and that will make the platelets in close proximity to the damaged region. Then coming to the role of platelets. So the primary hemostasis is initially initiated by the vessel wall. Second is by the platelet. So here you can see a megakaryocyte with the nucleus, and here you can see the megakaryocyte with the expelled nucleus. And the platelet is formed by a process of blebbing of the from the blebbing of the cytoplasm. Here you can see a large amount of contents you can see inside the small platelets. So this is a Leishman stained picture of platelets, where you can see minute things. It's just like a pinpoint in appearance. But on looking at the interior of the platelet, you can see the treasure of things which are inside the platelets. We may not have even think of such a treasure of contents inside a platelet. So the platelet is divided into a peripheral zone, organelle zone, membrane zone, and a structural zone. Here you can see the peripheral zone, which is depicted in this picture. It consists of glycoprotein receptors. This glycocalyx is made up of glycoprotein receptors. Around 30 receptors are present on the platelet membrane surface. Among that, only 4 or 5 are very important in platelet adhesion and activation. So the receptors which are important in platelet adhesion are glycoprotein 1A, 2A, glycoprotein 1B9, and glycoprotein 2B3A. That is present in the peripheral surface. Then coming to the organelle zone, it consists of the dense body. Those bodies are called dense because they are electron dense in the under the electron microscopy, and they carry a large amount of calcium, which is essential for the coagulation. Then another thing is the alpha granules. Alpha granules also is a source of large amount of things which are necessary for platelet activation and adhesion. Then membrane system. Membrane system consisting of the open canalicular system and dense tubular system. Actually, it is a spongy-like structure. This platelet is like a spongy-like structure, where you can see the open canalicular system and dense tubular system. Once getting activated, this platelet contents are released to the exterior through the OCS and DTS. And finally, the structural zone consisting of actin, myosin, which are the contractile proteins which cause the flip-flopping mechanism of the platelet during activation. Then this platelet activation happens in platelet aggregation occurs in 3 phases. First is adhesion, second is activation, and third is aggregation. Here you can see what the platelet is doing. You can see the small platelets coming to the injured blood vessels. Here you can see the same thing, that is the platelet getting attached initially via the glycoprotein 1A, 2A receptors and 1A, 2A receptors to the collagen, and via the 1B9 receptors it get attached to the von Willebrand factor. So as already mentioned, this von Willebrand factor is present in the subendothelium, and this collagen is also present in the subendothelium, which is exposed on damage to the blood vessels. So once this glycoprotein receptor 1B9 has getting attached to the von Willebrand factor, a number of biochemical changes is happening inside the platelets. So all those biochemical changes that happens normally in a resting stage, this platelet is platelet phospholipid or the glycolipids are negatively charged things are present in the inside of the platelets. On activation, that will become ulta. That will become ulta, and the flip-flop mechanism takes place, and all the interior contents are shed into the exterior. So while this contents are shed into the exterior, this main contents include P-selectin, fibronectin, factor V, factor 8, platelet factor, etc. And from the delta granules, ADP and ATP plus calcium. This, as I already mentioned, this calcium is abundant in this delta granules, which make them electron dense. And this ADP is a potential aggregating agent. So this is what happens during platelet adhesion and platelet activation. So we will see a video showing the platelet activation. Now you can see once the platelet getting attached, biochemical changes happen, the pseudopoda develops. From the osseous and through DTS, these contents are shed into the exterior. So then once it is getting activated, this receptor for fibrinogen, that is glycoprotein 2B, 3A get expressed on the platelet surface, which will bind with the another platelet, and the same thing happens, and finally a platelet plug is formed. Here you can see a large platelet plug which is formed of the activated platelets. Then video. Hope the primary hemostasis is clear for all. Can you hear the, can you see the video?
ആയി ആയി യെസ് മാഡം കാണാൻ പറ്റുന്നുണ്ടായിരുന്നു. ഓഡിയോ ഉണ്ടായിരുന്നില്ല, അതിന്റെ വീഡിയോ കാണാൻ പറ്റുന്നുണ്ടായിരുന്നു.
Okay. So I'm continuing with the secondary hemostasis. So usually a primary hemostatic plug is enough to clot the bleeding from a small injury. But if the injury is large, example, if it is a road traffic accident, and or if the bleeding is too large, this primary platelet plug cannot seal that wound. So secondary hemostasis will be initiated. So the secondary hemostasis is the rapid reinforcement of the chemically unstable platelet plug with chemically stable fibrin. And it includes a series of interdependent enzyme-mediated reactions. I think all of you are very much familiar with the coagulation factors and the coagulation cascade. So the coagulation factors are 13 in number, and majority of these are synthesized in the liver. As all of you can see, this majority of the coagulation factors are synthesized in the liver except factor 8 and except factor 8. That is, the source of factor 8 is platelets and endothelium. Then coming to the cascade model of coagulation, I think this thing is also familiar to all of you. It initiates the coagulation cascade in intrinsic, extrinsic, and common pathway. Intrinsic pathway starts with the contact activation factors 12 to 11. 11A activates 9 to 9A. This 9A in presence of 8 and phospholipid and calcium forms the intrinsic 10A's complex, which will activate the 10 to 10A. That is, it is entering the common pathway. And the simultaneously the extrinsic pathway, this released tissue factor will combine with factor 7, and the tissue factor factor 7 complex will activate factor 10, culminating in the production of conversion of prothrombin to thrombin, and this thrombin converts fibrinogen to fibrin. And as already mentioned, this fibrin is not as such very much stable, and it has to be cross-linked by factor 13A to make it more stable. So whenever there is a deficiency of factor 13, the patient may stop bleeding initially after the injury, but may later on, after 1 day or next day, the patient may starts to bleed. So there may be the deficit of factor 13. So all these things you have to keep in mind while working for a patient. Then there are some discrepancies while using this intrinsic and extrinsic and common pathways of coagulation. There are some unanswered things. That is, even though the APTT is prolonged so much, there was no bleeding in some of the patients, and some of the patients with prolonged APTT exhibit variable bleeding, and some of the patients with prolonged APTT faced severe bleeding. So that led to the conclusion that there is something is happening, some other coagulation models are happening inside the body. So that led to the discovery of a cell-based model of coagulation. See the cell-based model of coagulation. It's named as cell-based model because it is the main factors involved in the cell-based.
ഇത് ചെറിയ നെറ്റ് പ്രോബ്ലം ഉണ്ടെന്ന് തോന്നുന്നു. മാഡം അത് ഡിസ്കണക്ട് ചെയ്യട്ടെ, ഞാൻ വിളിച്ചു നോക്കാം. മാഡം ഡിസ്കണക്ട് ആയി പോയതാണ്, നെറ്റ്വർക്ക് പ്രോബ്ലം. ഇപ്പോൾ അത് ജോയിൻ ചെയ്യുന്നുണ്ട്. പ്ലീസ് വെയിറ്റ്. ഹലോ മാഡം. അയ്യോ, 500 വരെ പോകുന്നുണ്ടായിരുന്നല്ലോ ഇന്നലെയൊക്കെ.
Shabir sir.
ഹലോ മാഡം.
Shabir sir co-host ചെയ്യോ? ഷെയർ ചെയ്യാൻ പറ്റുന്നില്ല.
ഓക്കെ, വെയിറ്റ്. ജിജോ സാറെ, ഒന്ന് അനു മാഡത്തിനെ കോ-ഹോസ്റ്റ് ആക്കാവോ? IT.
Okay.
ഓക്കെ, അനു മാഡം കോ-ഹോസ്റ്റ് ആണ്.
Hello all. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
എവിടം വരെയാണ് കാണാൻ പറ്റിയത്? സ്ലൈഡ് ഷെയറിംഗ്.
Cell-based model of.
സെൽ ബേസ്ഡ് അതുവരെ കേട്ടോ?
കേട്ടു മാം.
ഓക്കെ. So hope it is clear that what are the pitfalls in the cascade model. Clear ayo the pitfalls? Even though the APTT was prolonged, the patient is not manifesting with the bleeding manifestations. So hello.
Yes, ma'am, carry on.
Slide sir.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yes,
okay. Okay. So the cell-based model of coagulation starts with the expression of the tissue factor, and it combines with factor 7. And this tissue factor activated factor 7A will activate factor 10 to factor 10A, and later on the formation of thrombin occurs. Now, please note this is the same as the old extrinsic cascade, but the amount of thrombin that is generated from the old extrinsic pathway is not sufficient to seal the plug or to produce an ample amount of fibrin. So this thrombin, so this happens through the initiation step, and so the thrombin has to be formed in ample amounts. So this will positively feedback the activation of factor 11 to 11A. So the role of 11, here you can see there is no factor 12. So clearly showing the absence of factor 12 in the coagulation cascade. And this factor 11 get activated to factor 11A, which initiates the old intrinsic cascade of coagulation. So the second, through the activation of factor 11, a large amount of thrombin is finally produced. So this is the amplification step. Then once the ample amount of thrombin has formed, that thrombin will convert fibrinogen to fibrin, and which will be cross-linked by the factor 13. Once this has to be inhibited, the tissue pathway factor inhibitor will come into place, and that will inhibit the further activation of factor 10. So this is the new cascade model of coagulation, which explains the absence of bleeding in the in patients who are deficient in factor 12 and factor 11. So this is the detailed explanation of the cell-based model. This is the propagation stage. Initial was the initiation. All this is taking place on the surface of the activated platelets. So showing the more role of the cells. That is, initial thing was the tissue factor expressing cells, and the second is the activated platelets. So this is showing the basic differences between the cascade and the cell-based model. In the cascade model, both the extrinsic and intrinsic pathways work independently, whereas in in cell-based model, the extrinsic pathway initiate the process and generate small amount of thrombin spark. So I already mentioned the thrombin spark, which is produced initially, will be in small amount. It has to be amplified, which is taking place in the second step called the amplification. Yet both can generate large amount of thrombin to form a clot in the cascade model, but in the cell-based model, followed by intrinsic pathway, which works on the platelets to produce the thrombin burst. Initially, a spark was there of thrombin was there generated, and which later on lead to the thrombin burst. There is no role for factor 12. And the cells, that is platelets and the endothelium, control the coagulation. Here, it was stated that the coagulation factors control the rate of coagulation, and cells are the only phospholipid surface. That was the thought process till a few years back, and now the cell-based model of coagulation explains majority of the unexplained things. Then once the clot has formed and it is stabilized by the fibrin, it has to be lysed. So that lysis is taking place during the fibrinolysis stage, which is initiated by the plasminogen. This plasminogen is synthesized by the liver and it is present in the inactive form, and it is getting activated to plasmin by the tissue plasminogen activator and urokinase plasminogen activator. And this plasmin in turn cleaves the fibrin into fibrin degradation products. I think all of you knows about the D-dimer. This D-dimer is one of the degradation product, and there are all the other products are known as FDPs. This is a picture depicting the fibrin network. Fibrin which was cross-linked by the fibrin factor 30. So on cleavage, this DD fragment, this is the DD fragment, this constitutes the D-dimer. Actually, it is, this is only the cross-linked fragment. This DD fragment is the cross-linked polymer with the factor 30. So the estimation of D-dimer is very important. So here we can see the fibrinolytic pathway. Here your clot is, once the wound has healed, the clot is resolved by the plasminogen. Then coming to the laboratory testing of hemostasis. As hope everything is clear about the hemostasis mechanism that is normally taking place inside the body, like the initial primary hemostasis, secondary hemostasis and all. So let me move on to the laboratory testing of hemostasis. Sister, can you hear, sister? Hello, am I audible?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, okay.
Ma'am.
Okay. Then coming to the laboratory testing, first comes the history. The history is very important. That is, seeing a patient and taking of the history is the prime most important thing in the hemostasis testing. As usually a proverb the patient should ideally should reveal each and everything during the history taking. That is the bleeding history, the patient, the age of onset. If the age of onset will help us to classify the type of disorder, then the type of bleeding, whether it is a mucosal bleeding or a joint bleeding. If it is a mucosal bleeding, that is usually due to the failure of the primary hemostasis. And if it's a joint bleeding or if it is a large bleeding, it is usually due to coagulation factor deficits. Number of episodes. Sometimes they may present only very rarely. And, the number of episodes the patient has bled is also important. Then the need for transfusion. It's another important thing, the need for transfusion. If the bleeding is so severe, the clinician will suggest for the transfusion. If the patient is needing a transfusion, his her or his BAD score will be high. This BAD score is the bleeding assessment tool score, which is introduced by International Society for Hemostasis. So then, as like bleeding history, the family history is also important for us to classify whether the disease is congenital or acquired, whether it can we can have an idea whether it will recur in the family. And the consanguinity, that is a marriage among the relatives. Then another thing is the medications. Some of the medications that can interfere with the coagulation testing. So it's very important to have an idea, or while the history of the patient, it's very important to have a cross-check on the medications that the patient is taking. Then coming to the testing, after taking proper history, we can proceed with testing. And in most of the coagulation disorders, a reflex testing is needed. And because we can't screen a patient and on the same day, we cannot proceed to the confirmatory test. Because first we have to screen the patient, then we can come to a conclusion what type of disorder the patient is having. Then we can move on to the confirmatory test. As the majority of the test or the quantitative determination of this test are highly expensive. So it is a reflex testing or an algorithmic testing is highly recommended for coagulation testing. Then in the screening test, we will be doing in the first line, and the confirmatory test in the second line. It's got stuck. Okay. Here you can see the primary hemostatic failure. As I mentioned, the history. From the history, we can have a basic idea about what type of disorder the patient is having. Usually, the primary hemostatic failures will present with petechiae and purpura. Petechiae, you can see the pinpoint lesions, and in purpura, a little more bigger than the petechiae. And the secondary hemostatic failure usually present with the bleeding into the joints. This is the prominent and typical feature of congenital secondary coagulation disorder. It's a hemophiliac patient. You can see the bleeding into the joints that has led to edema. So we'll discuss about the congenital bleeding disorders. Disorders of primary hemostasis are there, secondary are there. And primary hemostasis include the commonest ones are congenital thrombocytopenia, then platelet function disorders, and von Willebrand disease. And the secondary hemostasis include, as all of you know, hemophilia A, B, and von Willebrand disease. And rare coagulation factor deficiencies are also there. Then we will approach the patient with the primary hemostatic failure. Once we have taken the history, we'll get a basic idea what type of disorder the patient is having. Then we will move on to the first line of investigation, which includes a bleeding time, platelet count, platelet morphology, PFA 100 and PFA 200. And the second line investigations include platelet aggregometry, Rakoff assay, flow cytometry, electron microscopy, clot retraction, multimer analysis, and platelet UMI aggregometry. So let me move on to the bleeding time. That is the first line investigation. The bleeding time, as all of you know, it's now an outdated test, even though some under-resourced settings can even utilize this bleeding time. Then the peripheral smear, that is the Leishman-Stein smear, is a treasure of knowledge for us, especially relating to the platelet morphology and count. We can have a basic idea about the platelet count and also the platelet morphology, whether you can see giant platelets, hypogranular platelets, all those things you can make out easily from the peripheral smear. And the count is done by impedance principle in an automated cell counter, where you can get the MPV, that is the mean platelet volume, and platelet most frequent volume. All these two parameters you can get from the automated analyzer. Then the platelet morphology to assess the altered platelet count and exclude pseudo-thrombocytopenia. Here you can see a platelet satellitism. This is usually seen in some patients with who have developed antibodies against the platelets, so they will clump together. So this is EDTA-induced platelet satellitism. Then in this picture, you can see the giant platelets, which is a typical feature of the Bernard-Solier syndrome, and hypogranular platelets or hypogranular platelets, which you can make out easily in a GIMSA stained smear. And this hypogranular platelets are seen in gray platelet syndrome, as well as in a common condition called acquired platelet dysfunction due to eosinophilia, which is a transient condition. And the patient is having high eosinophil count. During eosinophil degranulation, the platelet granules also get degranulated. And here you can see a platelet without granules. Here you can easily make out the platelet with the granules. Here it's typically clear. So then coming to the automation in primary hemostasis testing, which includes PFA 100, flow cytometer, and platelet aggregometer. Then this PFA 100 is an instrument that exactly mimics what is happening inside the blood vessels. Here you can see an injured blood vessel. Here you can see a platelet PFA 100, which is the test cartridge. And here you can see this membrane. This membrane is coated with collagen and adrenaline and collagen and ADP. Both these are potential activators for platelet adhesion. And the sample, whole blood is aspirated through this aperture. And once it reaches here, it will get adhered by the collagen or ADP or collagen or adrenaline. And initially they can easily pass through this hole. And once the platelet get occluded, this area will get clogged. And that clog time or the closure time is noted, and that is known as the closure time. And another modified version of PFA 100 is PFA 200, which is exclusively used for P2Y12 receptor defect. And this PFA 100 is mainly for von Willebrand disease assessment. Then, so by that, the first line investigations got over. Then second line investigations. If we have found a defect in the primary assessment, primary hemostatic failure in the first line investigation, we will move on to the second line investigations. And the second line investigation, the first choice is platelet aggregation by light transmission aggregometry. And the sample used is platelet rich plasma, which is prepared from 3.2% trisodium citrate, and the blank which is used is platelet poor plasma. And the principle involved is that as the transmittance increases as the platelet aggregates. Here you can see this is the platelet poor plasma, which is used as a blank, which ensures 100% transmittance. There is no platelet, so the complete light will get transmitted through the tube cuvette. This is the tube cuvette that carries the magnetic bead, and this magnetic bead ensures the complete mixing of the platelets during the test. But the sample is taken in this test tube, and to that agonist is added. And here you can see the agonist added. The commonly used agonists are ADP, ristocetin, collagen, adrenaline, etc. And once the agonist is added, this platelet starts to aggregate. This is the exact mechanism that is taking place inside the blood vessel also. So the platelet, once the platelet starts to aggregate, more and more light will, initially the transmittance of the light is very less. Once it starts to aggregate, it will transmit more light. And here you can see majority of the platelets has responded to your agonist and the transmittance has increased. So this increase in the transmittance is recorded. And this is a graph showing the platelet aggregometry. Here you can see initial, this is the 0% transmittance, here where you can see the inert platelets. Once the agonist, here you have added the agonist, and once the agonist is added, this platelet has gone shape change, and they will start secreting their contents and will initiate the aggregation. And finally, more of the platelets got aggregated, and you can see the increase in the percentage of transmission. And this is another instrument. That instrument was using platelet rich plasma for platelet aggregometry. This is another instrument which uses whole blood platelet aggregation. Here, this is more advantageous in the fact that we need not have to prepare the PRP. Then coming to the next, once the platelet aggregation is okay, we'll move on to the von Willebrand factor protein. As I already mentioned, this von Willebrand factor has a major role. It has a role in the primary hemostasis as well as it has a role in the secondary hemostasis. So this is the full structure of a von Willebrand factor, and it is having D domains, A domains, and C domains. And the von Willebrand antigen quantity testing is done by the automated latex-based assay. This is the same as our latex-based agglutination assay. This is also used for this antigen testing. And there we will get only the amount of antigen, which is amount of von Willebrand antigen that is present, and its activity can be measured by another assay called ristocetin cofactor assay. That is measuring the quality of the platelets or the quality of the von Willebrand factor which we are having. Here we use an antibiotic. This is an old antibiotic, ristocetin, which is used for the induction of platelet agglutination. Here you can see this is the added ristocetin, and this is the von Willebrand factor from the patient. And here we are using dried platelets. The commercial, as the test cost is very high because it uses the reagent contains a formalin fixed dried platelets. So the dried platelets with the added ristocetin and the patient plasma, which provide the von Willebrand factor. If it is functional, if it is functionally normal, that will cause the agglutination. Then this is the schematic diagram showing the classification of the tests which are needed for the classification of the von Willebrand disease. Basically, it is qualitative and quantitative are there. Type 1 and type 3 are qualitative, and type 1 and type 3 are quantitative, whereas type 2, which comprises of 2A, 2B, 2M, 2N, which are all disorders, qualitative disorders. Then coming to the flow cytometry, as initially I mentioned, the surface receptors which are present on the platelet, which are very important for the adhesion. So we can check for the presence of these receptors on the platelet surface with the help of flow cytometry. The same thing which we are, the same principle which we are employing in the cell counters. You can test for the glycoprotein 1A, 2A, 2B, 3A, and 1B9. Then coming to the platelet Lumi aggregometry, this is almost an outdated test. Then coming to the other investigations, that is, as I shown in the picture, this von Willebrand factor is a multimer. It is secreted in multimer, and so its multimer can be analyzed by the help of protein electrophoresis. And next is the von Willebrand factor collagen binding assay. Initial in the platelet adhesion step, we have mentioned will bind with the collagen, and this can be tested. And von Willebrand factor factor 8 binding assay can also be tested. Then coming to the clot retraction time. Once the clot has formed, actually that clot has to be retracted, and clot retraction is the property of the platelet as well as the amount of fibrin. And the clot retraction is absent, and its typical features seen in Glanzmann's thrombocythemia. Then this is the granular content release. We have discussed a lot of granular contents are present inside the platelets, and on activation, this granular contents has to be released to the exterior. And thus that release is happening through the DCS, DTS and OCS, open canalicular system. So under electron microscopy, we can see the normal chocolate chip appearance of the platelets, and the granular content release is okay. Then with that, the first line and second line investigation of primary hemostasis is over. Then coming to the secondary hemostasis testing. I think we are familiar with hemophilia A and B, and there are a number of rare factor deficiencies. We have encountered a number of rare factor deficiencies during our coagulation testing. Then there are a few acquired factor deficiencies are there, then multiple factor deficiencies. All these are, I'm talking from my experience. So coming to the secondary hemostasis testing, the first line testing includes PT, APTT, TT, and fibrinogen. And the second line investigations, mixing study with pooled normal plasma, inhibitor screen, inhibitor assay, specific factor assay, and lupus anticoagulant. So this is the coagulation cascade. Still we are using this coagulation cascade, waterfall cascade model for the explanation of our laboratory testing. We will test our intrinsic pathway with the help of APTT, and we'll test our extrinsic pathway with the help of prothrombin time. And the final conversion, that is fibrinogen to fibrin, is tested by the thrombin time. So this is a basic coagulation workup showing how we'll proceed if the PT is prolonged, how we'll proceed if the APTT is only prolonged, and how we'll proceed if both PT and APTT are prolonged. So if the PT is prolonged, we can directly move on to PT 1:1 mix. So before going to that, we'll discuss the PT. I think all of you are familiar with the prothrombin time. So time taken for the citrated plasma to clot after the addition of tissue thromboplastin and calcium ions. And the time is, this test is timed from the addition of calcium chloride until the plasma clots, and it is known as the PT. And it, normal value is 11 to 15 seconds. And it is usually used to monitor patients on warfarin and to diagnose factor deficiency. And this PT is always reported along with INR. And INR is calculated by patient PT divided by logarithmic mean normal PT, the whole raised to ISI. The ISI stands for International Sensitivity Index, which is the sensitivity of your thromboplastin reagent to detect the deficiencies. So why we are always reporting a PT with INR? This INR is actually used for the controlling of the anticoagulant therapy. So I mentioned it is mainly used for the monitoring of patients on warfarin. So this phospholipid was initially obtained from the human brain, and which was later on shifted to rabbit brain, and now they are using recombinant technology for the production of thromboplastin. And since all the different thromboplastin have varying sensitivity to the effect of warfarin, they have standardized this warfarin, they have standardized the thromboplastin with the help of this ISI. And the INR system makes the PT results from different laboratories comparable. So the patient who is treating in a center in Ernakulam can take the same medication or control the dosage in Trivandrum also by looking at the same INR, which is adjusted with the help of this ISI. Then coming to the activated partial thromboplastin type, this is a check on the intrinsic pathway of coagulation, and normally the sample will float in 30 to 34 seconds. Then coming to the thrombin time, it is used to detect parameters which are not detected by PT and APTT, and it is usually prolonged in case of dys or hypofibrinogenemia. Dysfibrinogenemia is a condition where fibrinogen amount will be normal, but it is non-functional, whereas hypofibrinogenemia is a condition in which the amount of fibrinogen is less, and the normal reference range for the fibrinogen. And this is for the quantitative determination of fibrinogen, and it uses the closed technique for the detection of fibrinogen. Then coming to the interpretation, if isolated PT, if only PT is prolonged, we can have a direct idea that it is exclusively due to factor 7 deficiency, since only factor 7 is involved in PT. All other factors, if it is deficit, that will prolong the APTT also. Then isolated APTT prolongation can be due to factor 12, factor 11, factor 9, and factor 8. But as I mentioned earlier, this factor 12 deficient patient does not present with bleed. And if both the PT and APTT are prolonged, the most common reason is the vitamin K dependent factors, which includes factor 10, 9, 7, and 2. And the common pathway factors like 10, 5, and 2. The PT and APTT are normal. Still the patient is bleeding. The common culprit is factor 13. Then coming to the second line investigations, that is mixing study. It's just a mixing of the platelet plasma, patient plasma and normal pooled plasma. And you have to do a 1:1 mix, again rerun. Suppose you have got a PT or APTT of 60 seconds, you have to mix it with normal pooled plasma, which is prepared from 20 healthy normal individuals, which is supposed to contain all the coagulation factors in 100%. And once you mix it in 1:1 mix, then you have to again rerun the APTT. And if it comes back to normal, you have to do this percentage correction formula, patient PT or APTT into 1:1 mix. If you are doing PT correction, you will get the PT value, APTT, you will get the APTT value. Then that divided by patient PT into normal pooled plasma, the PT or APTT of the normal pooled plasma into 100. And if you are getting a correction of more than 70%, that confirms that it is due to factor deficiency, which is getting corrected by the supplement from the normal pooled plasma. And if you are getting less than 70% correction, it is suggestive of some inhibitors. The common inhibitors are lupus anticoagulant. So the factor was applied from the PNB, but it was inhibited by the inhibitor. So you have to further proceed for the inhibitor screen. You have to confirm whether it is a factor dependent inhibitor or it is a non-specific inhibitor. If it is a non-specific inhibitor like lupus anticoagulant, it will give an immediate non-correction. And if it is a factor dependent inhibitor, that is a time and temperature dependent type of inhibitor. So the same thing which we mixed earlier has to be incubated at 2 hours, incubated for 2 hours at 37 degrees Celsius. And again, you have to rerun that sample. And along with that, you have to run a control, which you have mixed freshly. So in the incubated mixed sample, you have provided the time and temperature for the inhibitor to act on your patient pooled normal plasma, where in the fresh mix you have been provided. So a difference of more than 7 seconds in the incubated mixture will give a clue that it is an inhibitor screen. Inhibitor screen is positive. And if the inhibitor screen is positive, it is usually in hemophiliac patients who are regularly on follow-up and on treatment with the coagulation, supplements. So for all those patients who have developed inhibitors, the treatment modality has to be changed. So this simple test is a very important test for the monitoring and for the diagnosis and for the monitoring or in the prognosis of hemophiliac patients. So if the inhibitor screen is positive, we have to move on to the Bethesda assay for the quantitation. It is just like we have to dilute the sample and we have to titrate the amount of inhibitor which is present in the sample with the help of this classical Bethesda assay. And actually, what is the role of measurement of factor activity levels? This mainly for the diagnostic purpose. You have to subtype, especially in hemophilia. If there is a factor deficiency identified, you have to identify which factor is deficient, whether factor 8 or factor 9, which are the commonest deficient factors. You have to identify. Then for the therapy, that is depending on the amount of factor in the patient, the severity of the bleed may change. That is, you can classify hemophiliacs into mild, moderate, and severe. We have to treat the severe hemophiliacs prophylactically, not therapeutically. Once the bleed on the treat, we have to treat them prophylactically. So anything in the factor level less than 1 is severe hemophilia, and 1 to 5 is moderate. And then for the prognostic application, that is for the measurement of post-infusion coagulation factor levels. The patient is on infusion with the coagulation factors. After the infusion, we have to check whether they are maintaining the levels of the coagulation factors. So these are the major important roles of this factor assays. And the factor assay works on different principles: mechanical clot or optical method. The major disadvantage with the optical method is that since it is a measurement of light, if the sample is hemolyzed or lipemic, we cannot do that on the sample. And here we are using the mechanical clot detection methods. Then two-stage assays using the chromogenic method is there. Then latex immunoagglutination method for von Willebrand factor antigen is there. Immunoturbidimetric method for factor 13 quantitation is also there. So there lies the importance of this coagulation factor assay. Then majority of the assays, that is testing of the factors of the intrinsic pathway, are tested by APTT based assay, whereas factors of the extrinsic and the common pathway are tested by the PT based assays. I'm not going into the details of the factor assays. Then coming to the fibrinolytic pathway, the most important test is D-dimer test, which utilizes a latex immunoagglutination method for the detection of D-dimer. And FDP is also evaluated, but it is not as much diagnostic important as the D-dimer. And then coming to the inhibitors of coagulation, protein C utilizes immunological method for the detection. Protein S also immunological method. Then antithrombin 3, which is detected by chromogenic assay. All these are protein C, protein S, and antithrombin 3 are they have deficiency of this inhibitors of coagulation. They are more for thrombophilia rather than bleeding. So these are the commonest deficiencies which are predisposing to thrombophilia: factor V Leiden, prothrombin 20210 mutation, protein C, protein S, and 83 deficiency. Then coming to the quality control in coagulation, both internal quality control and external quality control assurance measures are there. Internal quality control, but that is what we are using in the lab. We have to use pooled normal plasma as a reference standard, and we can use bi-level controls, like high and low level controls. In-house and intermission comparison can be employed. Inter-lab comparison can be employed. And if any of these methods which does not have this internal quality control or external quality assurance program, you can even use split sample analysis. And the external quality assurance program is provided by UK NICOS, National External Quality Assurance Scheme from the UK. Then ISHTM, that is International Society for Hemostasis and Thrombostasis and Thrombosis, which is organized by CMC Vellore and organized by College of American Pathologists. So these are the agencies that provide us external quality assurance program. Then discussing briefly about the global hemostasis testing, which includes ROTEM and TEG. ROTEM is rotational thromboelastometry, which provide global information on the dynamics of clot development, stabilization, and dissolution that reflect in vivo hemostasis. Actually, if we are doing the other routine tests like PT and APTT, it will take sample preparation around 30-40 minutes is the turnaround time. Whereas if you are using this global hemostasis testing like ROTEM and TEG, you can have a basic idea about which product has to be infused during the time of a surgery. So it is used as a POCT, point of care monitor, in complex major surgeries. And it has significantly reduced the use of blood component therapy and overall blood loss. And this is a picture showing the rotational thromboelastometry. And this is a picture of thromboelastogram. And these are the parameters that we are getting from the thromboelastogram. We can have a basic idea where the problem is, whether a coagulation factor is deficit, whether fibrinogen is deficit, whether the problem is having with the platelets, or you have excess fibrinolysis, and the product which has to be infused. Basic idea you will get from the thromboelastometry within 10 to 30 minutes. So it is an added advantage. It can be used as a POCT. Then this is a rotational thromboelastometry. It's just an added advantage is that it is having 4 separate informations. That is EXTIM, which gives an information about your extrinsic pathway, INTIM, which gives an information about your intrinsic pathway, and FIBTIM about the fibrinogen, and the overall efficiency will be divided from the app. So coming to the few things about the molecular testing in coagulation, and the most common molecular disorders in coagulation are prothrombin G20210A mutation, APCR or activated protein C resistance or factor V Leiden mutation, MTHFR gene mutation, and factor VIII gene mutation. These are the commonest molecular disorders which we are encountering in coagulation. Then actually what is APCR, or activated protein C? The initial stage we have mentioned what was happening to the protein C. This endothelial protein C receptor will bind with the protein and will get activated to activated protein C. And activated protein C in turn activates protein S, which in turn degrades factor V and VIII. Here this protein C is activated to activated protein C, but this activated protein C is unable to activate protein S. And that is majority of the cases, this APCR is due to a single point mutation of the factor V gene involving replacement of the arginine 506 with glycine, and it is called factor V Leiden mutation. So it was initially described in the city of Leiden, so it was named as factor V Leiden mutation. Then the laboratory evaluation include clot-based functional test or molecular testing, which includes the PCR-based molecular assay. Then second one is the prothrombin gene mutation, that is 20210 mutation. And this can also be confirmed by the PCR method. And I have put 2 cases. If you are interested, I will discuss these 2 cases. Sir? Shabir sir? Hello?
Hello?
Sir, am I audible, sir?
Yes, ma'am, no issue.
Sir, the session is going to end. I have put 2 cases. If the students are interested, I can answer.
Yeah.
And if they're answering correctly, you can give a prize to them.
Okay, thank you. I will. Then it is your turn.
Please unmute. Students who are participating, please unmute. These are all simple cases. Nobody is unmuting.
Yeah, somebody's unmuting.
Sharif, Nawaz.
Otherwise, you
Nawaz.
can message chat also. Yeah, somebody was saying.
Yes. So I will discuss this case. He's a 4-year-old male baby and he was presented with history of bleeding after circumcision. That was during before 1 year of age. And sorry, he had previous history of bruises after falling. His PT was 12 seconds. His APTT was 90 seconds. And on mixing PNP, that got to 32 seconds. It does become normal. And the platelet count of the patient is around 210,000. So platelet count is normal, PT is normal, only APTT was. Anybody can answer? Nawaz?
Factor deficiency.
Factor deficiencies.
Can you suggest which factor deficiency?
Ma'am,
Which one is the
hemophilia.
Yes.
Hemophilia.
Yes.
Because
Yes, we
APTT is prolonged, and after mixing study, it get normal.
Okay, very good. And the patient is a male baby.
Male baby.
Okay.
Hemophilia is an X-linked
Yes,
condition.
Very good. Can hemophilia occur in females?
Yes,
In which condition?
Both the father and also the mother is the mother is a carrier, and the father is an affected individual. Then the baby can be female
Hemophilia.
baby.
Okay. Can you know the name of the person who is answering the question?
Ma'am, Bafina.
Okay. So then, he's a 40-year-old male. You have to see the age of the patient. As I already mentioned, the age of the patient is very important. That is the age at presentation. Then when he was posted for liver biopsy, and on his pre-op workup, his PT was prolonged. He was not having any symptoms till the 40 years. And when he was posted for liver biopsy, his PT was prolonged. And his APTT was normal. And the biopsy was deferred. And what may be the possible cause? This patient is having some liver problem, and he is 40 years old, and he is on pre-op workup.
Vitamin K dependent deficiencies.
Factor 7. Most probably maybe a factor 7, or the patient is having liver maybe a multiple factor deficiency more often, but only the 6 only is prolonged. It may most probably it will be a factor 7 deficiency. Okay. Send my acknowledgement to all my mentors in Amrita who has taken me to the coagulation cascade and into the coagulation testing, to all the faculty and the staff from the Department of Pathology, Amrita Institute of Medical Sciences, my colleagues, my students, my inspiring students. And thank you one and all those who have listened to this talk. I hope I could convey something regarding the hemostasis and testing. So these are my references.
Thank you, madam.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Madam, you are becoming the specialist in coagulation study.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Anybody have any other doubts on today's session? You can ask. Otherwise you can chat.
If you have any doubts regarding this topic,
Hello, Pradeep sir, are you there?
Pradeep sir?
It was nice presentation അല്ലേ പറയാം പറ്റില്ലല്ലോ കേട്ടില്ല അല്ലെ നമ്മള് it was nice presentation അല്ലേ പറയാം
Suja madam. Are you there, ma'am?
അവസാനം ക്വസ്റ്റ്യൻ ചോദിച്ചു പറഞ്ഞു
Do you have any
വൈറ്റമിൻ കെ ഡിപെൻഡന്റ്
remarks on this
അങ്ങനെ
presentation?
പറഞ്ഞു വിത്ത് ഫാക്ടർ അപ്പോഴേക്കും
Hello, dear Anu.
Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
It was a very nice presentation.
Thank you, Suja Miss.
Okay, it was very useful to all the students who listen properly.
Okay, okay, ma'am. It's really a troubling topic. It's a bit confusing too. So those who have properly listened.
It was very helpful. No, Amarda's experience also helped you.
Sure, ma'am.
Very nice, very nice. Thank you, Anu, very much.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
കണ്ണൂരാണ്
Hello, Anu.
Where are you?
Yes, sir.
So actually, I have one doubt regarding the PTINR.
Yes, sir.
Normally, you mentioned they are calculating the mean value of the normal. Once we are calculating the PTINR, we have to take the mean value. But most
Yes,
of the
sir.
labs, they are not taking the mean value. They are either 13 or 14 seconds only there. Actually,
No,
that's
sir.
creating a lot of problems.
Yes, yes. Literally, it is creating a lot of problems. Actually, once we are taking a no lot of a PT reagent, you have to establish the range with the PNP, pooled normal plasma, and you have to include that range into the machine along with the change in the ISI. It has to be, it has to happen. It's the ideal thing, sir.
That does not work in any of the labs also there. That we felt with even cardiology cases and pulmonary embolism treatment. This will get
Yes,
a lot
sir.
of problem on the point also there. Okay,
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
that's a good suggestion you made it of by calculating the formula.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. Very nice presentation actually you conveyed. And I expect more on the molecular testing regarding that cell. So they're actually here MTHFR genes. Most probably the clinicians are taking more interest on
Asking for.
asking for that in most of the reputed hospitals. So they are asking for even APCR and MTHFR.
Yes, yes, sir. We have APCR and MTHFR. Since the crowd is mostly of the BSc.
Okay. Actually, the clinicians are more interested on this type of pattern other than the PTT and PTL. So they have a keen idea on that point. But the genetical studies, they want to be publishing with a paper. They are giving more emphasizing on the gene mutation levels on even with the factor 8 and the other. So that's what. Okay. Very nice presentation. You did it well. You gathered all the materials. Thank you. Thank you, Anu. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Madam, thank you. And one question from Mr. Sajesh.
Yes, sir.
We put in chat box. Thank you, madam. Excellent presentation. And his question is, any information could you please share about lupus anticoagulant test?
Yes, sure, sir. Since this topic
Lupus
is...
anticoagulant, yeah.
Yes, I will share, sir. What is your doubt, sir, regarding lupus anticoagulant? Actually, I have mentioned about the 1:1 mixing study. So we are proceeding if we are getting a correction on mixing study with the factor studies, and if you are not getting a correction, we will suspect the lupus or the factor specific inhibitors. And lupus testing has to happen in a 2-stage assay. That is the initial thing is with the APTT. That APTT has to be tested with 2 reagents, that is lupus specific reagent that contains high sensitive reagent, that is the phospholipid content of the lupus reagent has to be high. Then you have to retest it with the repeat testing with the DRVVT. DRVVT should include a screening and a confirmed reagent. Once it is we are getting a positive with DRVVT screen, we will move on to DRVVT confirm, and from the DRVVT confirm we have to move with the beta-2 glycoprotein, and we have to confirm it with the beta-2 glycoprotein also, just done in biochemistry. So if you have specifically can ask the doubt, I can answer it better. I think it's clear regarding the lupus. Lupus is the most commonly encountered test in our lab. And it is a vast topic I have not included here.
He said that is cleared his doubt, madam. Thank you.
Okay, okay. We have to use 2 APTT based tests. One with a low APTT phospholipid content, and the second one with a high APTT content.
One more question from Dr. Pradeep Kumar.
Yes, sir.
Sarah is asking what are the conditions where we get giant platelets?
Giant platelets are seen in BSS, Bernard-Solier syndrome. It's a condition where we are getting giant platelets. That we can easily make out the morphology, and before seeing the peripheral smear, we can get the idea from the CBs, peripheral, from the cell counter, that is MPV. MPV is analogous to MCV, which will give a clue about the presence of giant platelets. And the most frequent volume of the platelet is will give a more clue to the presence of giant platelets.
Okay. Anybody have more doubts? So I feel there is no more doubts or feedback. So we are moving to the end of the session. Let me welcome Ms. Daya, BSc MLT first year student of LISI College of Allied Health Sciences, for delivering vote of thanks officially.
Greetings to all. Honorable Chief Guest Mrs. Anu Catherine Jacob, respected Principal Dr. Shabir S. Iqbal, a most valued invited guest, faculty and students. Myself, Diaros Robin, first year BSc MLT student of LISI College of Allied Health Sciences. It's my privilege to have been asked to propose a vote of thanks on this occasion. I, on behalf of LISI College of Allied Health Sciences and the entire LISI fam, extend a very hearty word of thanks to Mrs. Anu Catherine Jacob, a well-known pathologist and our distinguished speaker of the day, for her much important class on laboratory evaluation of hemostasis. Thank you, ma'am, for your wonderful session. Next, I would like to take this opportunity to place on record our hearty thanks to our beloved principal, Dr. Shabir S. Iqbal, for the perfect logistics support, guidance, managing and conducting this program like this through a digital platform and making it a huge success. I also like to thank all our beloved teachers, non-teaching staff and students of LISI Medical and Educational Institutions, the IT department of LISI, who made this meeting possible, and all the audience for their participation. Once again, on behalf of LISI College of Allied Health Sciences, I thank each and everyone who participated in this program and making this a grand success. We hope that this pandemic will be somehow resolved in the near future, and somewhat we were able to learn many things from this crisis. Let's defeat this pandemic together. So thank you everyone. Have a nice day.
Thank you, Dhaya. So today's session is ended. Thank you all dignitaries and participants, especially today's speaker, Anu Catherine Madam. Hope all we can meet at the next session with a new speaker and with a new topic. Thank you all. Take care.
Okay, thank you, Shabir sir.
Thank you, madam. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.